The most powerful survival technology in your kitchen isn't your stove, your microwave, or even your refrigerator. A simple jar filled with salt, acid, oil, or fermentation. A system designed to stop time. Before most civilizations existed, humans were already fighting one of the most dangerous enemies in history: food spoilage. Fresh food disappears quickly in the ancient world. That didn't just mean inconvenience. It meant hunger, disease, failed journeys, and sometimes death. The solution that helped farmers protect harvests, armies march for months, traders cross continents, and sailors survive long voyages still exists today is pickling. Pickling is not a side dish. It is one of the oldest survival technologies ever created. Agriculture gave humans stability, but it also created a new problem. Crops arrived all at once during harvest seasons, yet people needed to eat every day of the year. Vegetables spoiled within days in warm climates. Fruits fermented uncontrollably. Leafy greens wilted almost immediately. Drying worked for grains, and some fruits. Smoking helped preserve meat. Heavy salting kept food from rotting, but destroyed texture and taste. What people needed was a method that could preserve plant foods while keeping them edible, flavorful, and nutritious. Around 2400 BCE in the regions of ancient Mesopotamia, communities discovered that when vegetables were submerged in salt water, something unexpected happened. Instead of decaying, the food stabilized. Natural lactic acid bacteria began converting sugars into acid. That acid lowered the pH and prevented harmful microorganisms from growing. The vegetables did not rot, they fermented. This was the beginning of brine. Fermentation, the foundation of pickling. At nearly the same time, cucumbers, originally domesticated in the Indian subcontinent thousands of years earlier, began spreading through trade routes into the Middle East and Mediterranean regions. Early cucumbers were bitter and tough, not especially pleasant when eaten fresh, but when placed in brine, their bitterness softened and their texture improved. Pickling did more than preserve the cucumber, it transformed it into something desirable. As trade networks expanded, the technique traveled with merchants and migrants. By the time preserved vegetables became common in ancient Egypt, pickling was already an established food practice. Brined foods were used during long river journeys and stored for periods when fresh produce was limited. Preservation was not luxury, it was insurance against uncertainty. Greek societies later adopted fermented vegetables and began associating them with digestion and health. The Romans expanded the practice further, using both brine and vinegar. Vinegar pickling allowed faster preservation, which was useful for feeding cities and supplying military campaigns. Roman soldiers carried preserved vegetables because they were durable, lightweight, and made basic rations easier to eat. Food preservation supported logistics, and logistics supported expansion. As Roman influence spread into Europe, colder climates created new challenges. Winters could last months without fresh produce. Fermented cabbage evolved into sauerkraut, a food that stored well and provided vitamin C when fresh vegetables were unavailable. What looked like a regional dish was actually a seasonal survival strategy. Across Asia, fermentation developed independently. In China, vegetables such as mustard greens, radishes, cucumbers, and beans were preserved in brine for long-term storage. In Korea, preservation became more complex, combining salt, seasoning, and controlled fermentation to produce kimchi, prepared seasonally in large quantities. It ensured a stable vegetable supply through long winters. In South Asia, the approach evolved differently. Instead of relying only on saltwater fermentation, preservation often used salt combined with oil, spices, and sunlight. Raw mango, known as kacha, became one of the most important pickling ingredients. Mango pieces were mixed with salt, turmeric, chili, mustard seeds, fenugreek, and mustard oil. The salt removed moisture. The oil created a protective barrier against air, and sunlight accelerated stabilization. This method produced mango achar, a pickle designed not only to last months, but sometimes years. Lime pickle followed a similar principle, using salt and thyme to soften the fruit while allowing natural acidity to increase preservation. Strength. Mixed vegetable pickles combined carrots, cauliflower, turnips, green chilies, and garlic, creating seasonal preservation systems based on winter harvests. Garlic pickle relied on oil and salt to prevent spoilage, while developing deeper flavor over time. Chili pickles preserved surplus peppers, preventing waste during peak harvest periods. These South Asian oil-based pickles represent a different preservation science. Instead of relying only on fermentation or vinegar, they control three factors at once: moisture, oxygen, and microbial growth. Oil blocks air, salt reduces water activity, and spices provide antimicrobial compounds. The result is long-term stability in warm climates, where fermentation alone can be unpredictable. Across the Middle East, pickled turnips, cucumbers, eggplants, and olives became everyday foods. In Mediterranean regions, olives themselves required curing and brining before they were even edible. In Eastern Europe, fermented dill cucumbers became a staple, stored in barrels and naturally soured over time. These traditional sour pickles relied entirely on fermentation rather than vinegar. By the Middle Ages, pickling had become a standard household skill across much of the world. Families preserved seasonal harvests at the end of growing periods, storing vegetables in clay jars, wooden barrels, or sealed containers. Salt availability shaped regional techniques because salt was valuable and sometimes scarce. Preservation knowledge passed through generations because losing a harvest without preservation could mean winter shortages. The importance of pickling became even more visible during the Age of Exploration. Beginning in the 15th century, long sea voyages created extreme food challenges. Fresh produce spoiled quickly, and sailors often suffered from vitamin deficiencies. Fermented vegetables such as sauerkraut and pickled cucumbers lasted for months and helped maintain nutritional balance. Preservation technology made long-distance exploration possible. When European settlers arrived in North America, they brought their pickling traditions with them. Cucumbers were planted early, and seasonal preservation became common in colonial households. Over time, commercial production replaced home preservation as cities grew. In the 19th century, large-scale brining operations allowed cucumbers to be stored and processed in bulk. Immigrant communities, especially from Eastern Europe, introduced strong traditions of naturally fermented dill pickles. In urban centers like New York, street vendors sold barrel-cured sour pickles directly to customers. These pickles were alive with fermentation, sharply sour, and deeply flavored. And if you're loving this deep dive, hit like, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Later, vinegar-based pickling became more common because it allowed faster production and consistent results for large-scale distribution. Modern science eventually explained what ancient cultures had already mastered through experience. Fermentation works because lactic acid bacteria convert natural sugars into acid, lowering pH and preventing harmful microorganisms from growing. Vinegar pickling works by immediately creating the same acidic environment. Oil-based pickles work by removing oxygen and limiting moisture. Every method controls the conditions that spoilage organisms need to survive. Today, pickles exist in many forms: fermented sour, cucumbers, vinegar dill pickles, sweet pickles, bread and butter pickles, sauerkraut, kimchi, olive brines, Middle Eastern turnip pickles, South Asian mango achar, lime pickle, chili pickle, garlic pickle, mixed vegetable achar, and countless regional variations. Each one represents a local solution to the same global problem: how to make seasonal food last. Modern refrigeration reduced the survival necessity of pickling, but it did not replace its value. Interest in fermented foods has increased again because of their flavor complexity and their role in supporting beneficial gut bacteria. Traditional methods that once ensured survival are now recognized for both cultural importance and biological function. The jar of pickles in a modern kitchen represents thousands of years of experimentation and adaptation. Farmers adjusted salt levels based on climate. Families preserved surplus harvests to prevent waste. Traders carried techniques across continents. Soldiers, sailors, and travelers depended on preserved food to complete journeys that fresh food alone could never support. Pickling is not just cucumbers in vinegar. It is the science of controlling time, moisture, oxygen, and microbial life. It is the result of humanity learning how to protect food in a world where freshness was temporary and uncertainty was constant. Every civilization faced the same risk of spoilage and scarcity. Across climates, cultures, and centuries, one solution kept appearing in different forms: control the environment, and food survives. The next time a jar of pickles is opened, it represents more than flavor. It represents a technology older than refrigeration, older than most written history, a method that helped humans store harvests, survive winters, travel across oceans, and build stable societies. Pickles are not a modern convenience. They are a quiet record of human adaptation. And once food is understood this way, it stops being ordinary. It becomes evidence of how people learn to work with nature, bacteria, climate, and time itself, turning fragile harvests into reliable survival, one preserved jar at a time. If you want more real food history, the kind that shows how every day foods shape survival, culture, and civilization. Stay with this channel, because the deeper you look into what you eat, the clearer it becomes that every traditional food is a story of human resilience, experimentation, and survival.